Welcome to meeting number 98 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, also known as the mighty OGGO, the only committee that matters. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 17, 2022, committee is meeting on the study of the Arrivecan application. Just a reminder to those in person not to put your earpieces next to the microphone as it causes feedback and potential injury to our very valued interpreters. We have two witnesses today. Welcome back, Ms. Gorman and Mr. Ososki. I understand you both have opening statements. We'll start with you, Ms. Gorman, for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. Bonjour. Quand j'ai témoigné devant le comité en octobre,
the committee in October, I talked about the internal investigation that I initiated following receipts of allegations of misconduct and the referral made to the RCMP. Le 19 décembre,
back from the internal CBSA investigation. A preliminary statement of fact is not a conclusion and does not reflect all of the information, including from respondents. It's relevant documentary evidence collected to date in the course of an investigation. As laid out in my correspondence to you, these packages contained documents that fit the parameters of material that you requested in October. As such, it was translated and provided to you. The emails that you were provided are also relevant to testimony you received at previous meetings. Specifically, it shows that the Botler chatbot was not the result of an unsolicited proposal, and that there was a pattern of persistent collaboration between certain officials and GC strategies. They show efforts to circumvent or ignore established processes and roles and responsibilities. I need to say at this point that the investigation remains ongoing. Ideally, it will be further informed by information and interviews from key individuals who have been requested to speak to the investigators. I am trying to balance my knowledge of information that you have been seeking against the integrity of the investigation. In other words, respect for both due process and for Parliament. Public servants, the employees of the CBSA, need to have confidence in our disciplinary processes and the internal investigations that support them. Parliamentarians should know if information that is provided to them is unsupported by facts. La conclusion de notre travail interne nous apportera à la clarté
will bring us the clarity that we need to take more exhaustive action in the future if necessary. As I testified at my previous appearance, I have already implemented changes in how the agency manages and oversees procurement. Better controls and oversight have been put in place, including having those with procurement authority in headquarters retake their training, having a senior committee review every task authorization, and centralizing procurement responsibilities within the organization. These controls will be calibrated over time and with a fuller understanding of what happened and why.
And the procurement ombuds. It will also be informed by the internal review that is ongoing with respect to contracts and documents associated with Arrivecan. I would like to assure you that my team is working full out to provide you as quickly as possible over 30,000 pages of information that you have requested from CBSA in the course of your study. Nous avons déjà fourni 6 lots de documents.
We have provided 6 packages of translated records. Translation on the remaining material is ongoing. I will continue to send bilingual packages as they are completed.
Know everything. What we do know is not okay. I'm concerned and I want to get to the bottom of it. I must emphasize how critical it is that the CBSA maintain the confidence of Canadians as we carry out our important mandate. The situation should in no way dishonor the dedicated employees, frontline border service officers across the country and around the world, serving Canadians day in, day out with professionalism and integrity. I'm focused on not letting that happen. I expect you'll have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gorman. Mr. Ososki, welcome back. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. We are approaching 4 years since these events unfolded, so I'm relying on the best of my recollection, what the agency has provided me, as well as my review of the testimony from previous meetings. I would like to take this opportunity to clearly lay out the facts as I remember them. If the committee has other relevant information they wish to share with me, I hope you will do so, and I'll be happy to review it and get back to you. I'm going to begin with reminding the committee of the exceptional circumstances we found ourselves in during March of 2020. We were shutting down the largest unprotected border in the world while trying to ensure that critical supply chains remained functional for the essential trade of food, medicine, PPE, etc. We had repatriation flights for Canadians returning home and had to manage immigration issues with the United States. We had to manage fear and uncertainty in our own workforce while ensuring the integrity of our frontline operations. Coordinating this with our U.S. counterparts and supporting the government in this historic time was my priority. Arrivecan helped us administer the pandemic border measures, but I relied on my officials to deal with the procurement details. I will now turn to a few points made by Mr. McDonald during his testimony regarding Deloitte and the vendor selection. Sorry?
Mr. Carey, you're not muted.
I will now turn to a few points made by Mr. McDonald during his testimony regarding Deloitte and the vendor selection process. With respect to comments he made about the CARM contract with Deloitte, I have reviewed my business records, and I offer the following context. On March 14th, I received an email from the senior partner at Deloitte offering to help in any way they could with our challenges during the pandemic. I immediately passed this along to several of my vice presidents. The vice president of the CARM project replied that while Deloitte had cleared people who knew our systems, they were already stretched on CARM. This is the best evidence of the true state of play with Deloitte. Clearly not a penalty box issue. And I will emphasize that all of my business records clearly show a cordial and business-like relationship with Deloitte. All I can say is that we were all working with Deloitte to make sure CARM was a success. With respect to Mr. McDonald's statement that VPs were told not to use Deloitte, I have no recollection of providing this direction. I have asked a few members of my former executive team if they recall this, and they don't. In fact, one of them said that they would have objected if I had said that, as Deloitte was working on other contracts within the agency at the time, and there were no issues. My understanding is that Deloitte has continued to work with the agency. To be clear, a deputy minister has no authority to ban a firm unilaterally. No one was in the penalty box, and there's no evidence to support this. I'll now focus on the few days following the request from the Public Health Agency to look into an app that I received on March 22nd, 2020. I immediately forwarded this request to my CIO, Mr. Dwan, as well as my Vice President of the Travelers Branch. 4 days later, on March 26, Mr. Dwan shared simple mock-ups of what the application could look like with myself and my Executive Vice President. The committee will have seen 2 relevant meetings in my calendar at this time, one on March 26 at 10 a.m., where I had a teleconference with Mr. Dwan and my Executive Vice President, where he showed us the mock-ups, and at 10:43 a.m. that same day, I forwarded those simple mock-ups to the DM of Health and the President of the Public Health Agency. On March 27th, we had another meeting to discuss issues raised by those same DMs. To be clear at this point, no one could have envisioned how many versions and releases of the app there would be, nor its cost. I have reviewed my business records during this time period, and I have not been able to find any emails from Mr. Dwan or anyone else regarding vendor selections options developed by Mr. McDonald or Mr. Utano. The agency has confirmed this to me as well. I have no recollection of being asked for my opinion on Deloitte or any other potential vendor as part of the Arrivecan procurement. Speed was of the essence, as airports were slowing down with the paper-based process and provinces were demanding better data. I was relying on my vice presidents for their best advice on how to manage this situation. While I haven't seen any of the documents involved, Mr. Dwan's testimony states that he was provided a choice between a fully outsourced Deloitte solution or an option to augment our existing capabilities. Mr. Dwan testified that for a variety of reasons, such as using the CBSA cloud versus a private sector cloud, speed, and agility, that the staff augmentation was the preferred approach. This choice makes sense to me, especially considering the legal and privacy issues involved. Given what I've stated, the choice appears to be a rational, business-based decision and nothing to do with CARM. If the committee has different information in their possession, then I'd be happy to review it. To this day, I remain exceptionally proud of how the CBSA responded to the pandemic, and I hope these current matters don't diminish the efforts of the many thousands of CBSA employees who served Canada during this unprecedented event. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ososki. We'll start with Mrs. Kusie for 6 minutes, please. The floor is yours, Mrs. Kusie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Imagine this. You are a public servant. You are someone who has made the decision to come and help your country. I made this decision. I personally made this decision as a member of the Canadian Foreign Service. You swear that you will act in your best capacity possible for the best interest of this country. Now imagine that the worst situation for your nation occurs since wartime, a pandemic, and you are forced to make the best decisions possible that you can in your position for your nation with the information that you have. You do your best, you navigate the system, but things go wrong. The application that you are working on ends up to be a $54 million boondoggle, a stain on the government, which is already neck deep in boondoggles. Another instance of possibly unethical behavior by this government, and certainly incompetent behavior by this government, and a definite lack of oversight. But you tried your best because you were a public servant. The stress of the investigation of this $54 million boondoggle gets to you. So you go on medical leave and you think things can't possibly get worse. But they do get worse, and they got worse for Cameron McDonald, who was a director general at CBSA, and Antonio Utano, who was an ADM at the Canada Border Services Agency. Things got worse for them after coming here, giving what they believed was truthful testimony, their heartfelt testimony, to speak truth to power, to speak truth to Canadians, when they were suspended. But not only suspended without pay. And for what reason? They claimed that they were misled by senior CBSA officials. They were intimidated, that this was retaliation, that this was an attempt to muzzle them, that this was the CBSA's opportunity to use them as a scapegoat. There were no allegations, no details, no evidence. What they did receive were threats that decisions would be made if they were not compliant. So, Ms. O'Gorman, I'm here to ask you today, on behalf of Mr. McDonald, on behalf of Mr. Utano, on behalf of public servants everywhere, on behalf of Canadians, why were Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano suspended without pay?
CBSA is conducting an internal investigation. Neither of those individuals work for the CBSA right now.
Believe anything that you say today, these canned speaking notes, when both Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano have stated that they were misled by senior CBSA officials as to who even chose Arrivecan. This committee has found you not having spoken the truth before to this committee before. There's no reason we should believe this. Can you tell the committee then, what evidence do you have of Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano for their suspension? Can you share with that, please? What evidence do you have for this committee?
I'm not using speaking points, and I don't believe I've been informed of not having told the truth to this committee. I did not take those actions. They don't work for me.
Well, we would like to know what evidence you had. That was my question. As well, their legal fees were being paid until this point of their suspension, and now they're no longer being paid. Why did you suspend paying their legal fees?
So the preliminary statements of fact were provided to their deputy heads, and I took decisions that are consistent with the Treasury Board policy on legal fees.
Yeah, this information isn't providing any new information to us, Ms. O'Gorman. Is this the type of treatment that CBSA whistleblowers can expect in the future? Is this the type of treatment that public servants can expect in the future? The CBSA was also made to know of threats against Mr. McDonald by Mr. Doan. What steps, then, can you tell us, did you take to protect Mr. McDonald from facing negative reprisals from higher-ups, please?
I heard that testimony here. There are processes and systems in place when somebody believes they've been subject to harassment. I'm trying to conclude an investigation. My interest is understanding what happened,
You
I
have
don't
an opportunity
understand.
to speak the truth to people here today. Just tell Canadians, why were they suspended without pay? Share that with everyone.
I did not take that action, and it's not for me to talk about. Their
Okay.
deputy heads
Mr.
took that
Ososki,
action.
There are accusations that the public safety minister at the time was wanting someone's head on a plate. How involved was that current minister in the building of Arrivecan? And how involved was that minister's office in covering up the misconduct connected to the development of the Arrivecan app?
Comments occurred after I retired.
I can
Again,
speak. I can speak to
okay,
that.
please go ahead, Ms. Gorman.
The Minister of Public Safety was informed by me that we were launching an investigation. He expressed concern over the nature of the allegations, and he indicated that he expected me to deal with any gaps that they showed and to go forward with the investigation and to let him know if there were any pertinent information that he should be aware of. He never said that he was looking for anybody's head on a platter.
Well, we were also advised.
I apologize.
by-
That is our time, Mrs.
Thank you.
Kusie. Ms. Atwin, over to you for 6 minutes, and welcome back to OGGO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good to see everyone, and Happy New Year. And thank you so much to our witnesses for coming back to the committee today. I know last time was you're in the hot seat as well, and it was a bit of a difficult conversation, and it seems we're off to a similar start today. But I'd really like to, I think, Mr. Ososki, you mentioned the importance of highlighting just how much work, as well, Ms. Gorman, what the CBSA does for Canadians, protecting our borders. I really think it's important for us to separate kind of what's happening here with this important integral work that we have. And of course, what they endured during the pandemic, very much so the front line, dealing with a lot of the pent up anger and hostilities, even from, community members who are just dealing with the uncertainties of that time. So just want to thank you for everything you've done. And of course, for providing your testimony for this very important study. And we certainly all want to get to the bottom of what occurred. So I very much appreciate your opening statements as well. And, really what I'm going to do is just kind of take us through, again, step by step, how we kind of got to this place. Perhaps quite repetitive at this point, because again, this has been quite an ongoing saga. But Ms. Gorman, maybe I'll begin with you. Can you confirm again for the committee, just for complete clarity, when the investigation into this matter was first launched, as far as your role as president?
Sure. I received information. I received the allegations in the fall of 2022, and I provided it to our Director General of Security, who launched an investigation in November.
Great, thank you. And of course, this investigation, it remains ongoing. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we'll certainly know more, once the investigation is complete. And of course, the RCMP, they're also conducting their own investigation. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of whether the RCMP is conducting an investigation. So as I've testified before, we provided the material that we received to the RCMP. They've indicated that should they wish to have any information, they will seek it through a production order, and we stand ready to give them whatever they seek. I don't know if they are conducting an investigation. I do know they have the information and the allegations.
Okay, thank you. And also in your opening statement, you mentioned a bit about some of the changes around procurement practices in the CBSA since you've become president. And just if you could further clarify some of those changes, you mentioned some really great ones. I think particularly the senior oversight piece is really important, just to ensure that everybody's got eyes on something. So hopefully we can avoid this in the future. But can you just provide further detail to some of those changes? And perhaps, add clarity to, were these changes instituted specifically because of what we're seeing right now around the Arrivecan experience, as I'll call it, or were there intentions to kind of tighten things up around procurement ahead of that?
So I'll just speak to the first part of your question. So some of the changes, indeed, all contracts, task authorizations are coming through a senior executive committee now to look to conduct a challenge function. And we've centralized all procurement into one branch. So what I've seen was a breakdown of roles and responsibilities. I saw engagements with contractors without seeing the presence of procurement officials. Procurement officials play an important role beyond signing documents. And so based on what I've seen, I felt that there was a breakdown and a lack of controls, and that's what I've put in place. There will be more recommendations to come. We'll calibrate. Perhaps all have been found to have overreacted and slowed things down. But right now, given what I've seen, that's what I've put in place. And at the same time, trying to use fewer contractors.
Great. And just for the second part of that question, were there any intentions to tighten up kind of procurement processes or look at improvements ahead of this Arrivecan experience, or is it really kind of coming out of what we've seen over the last few months?
Coincided with me assuming this role, so I didn't have much runway to examine or consider the procurement function. When I started, there was nothing glaringly absent, but some of this information and the allegations came to me early in my tenure, so I acted.
Great. And as our current president of the CBSA, do you have faith in the organization's ability overall to follow fair procurement practices moving forward?
I have absolute faith in the organization, including in procurement practices. We're dealing and trying to get to the bottom of a set of actions and work by individuals that, I'm looking forward to an investigation to conclude on. But I have absolute confidence in the CBSA and its application and adherence to policies.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ososki, if I can just switch to you now. And again, bringing us back to this, in the midst of the pandemic and some of the things that were being experienced and the necessity to act. And I'm just wondering, what data were the provinces asked for at the onset of the pandemic? And how is that data crucial to help inform public health officials on how best to protect Canadians from COVID-19 in the context of CBSA?
Thank you for the question. And it was actually quite interesting this past weekend reviewing my business records and seeing some of the back and forth in terms of the initial requirements. Provinces, in fact, were developing their own applications. Airports had developed some of their own applications. Mostly what we were interested in and the Public Health Agency was wanting from us was the collection of the contact tracing information. Where are you coming from? Name, address. This was being passed off to the provinces so they could monitor people on their arrival in case they needed to ensure that their health was in place.
I'm afraid I have to cut you off there because we're past our 6 minutes, but perhaps the next round. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Gorman, does CBSA have a policy or a rule to protect civil servants in case of suits linked to their employment? For instance, by paying their lawyer fees? For instance, by paying their lawyers' fees? We follow the Treasury Board policies. We are subject to those policies. Thank you. So before they were suspended, Mr. McDonald and Utano had lawyers helping them that were paid by CBSA. As I've said, I made decisions that align with the policies in place. I know certain things were published or certain sentiments were made public, but my answer is that I was in line with policies. So the lawyers were paid by CBSA following the policies and rules in place. Is that correct? I would say that there are two ways to pay the lawyers, and I'm sorry, I will switch to English for this.
This is before parliamentary committees and in legal proceedings.
Okay.
And the criteria are set out, and I am consistent with that policy and the decisions that I've made.
Actuellement, est-ce que...
Currently, are those two civil servants still covered by this protection policy? Do they still have lawyers whose fees are being paid by taxpayers, basically? If I receive requests, I can make decisions. I've made decisions for every request that I have received. Now, the usual meeting places for civil servants and potential or current service providers, where do those meetings usually take place? I would say it happens in the workplace. Now, that's not to say that there are no meetings outside. there are no set rules. No set rules about the exact location of such meetings. We do have a values and ethics code that we follow. There's the question of conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest, and that guides us when we decide how and where to meet with vendors. In the emails that you've sent us this week, I saw many meetings, either weekly or bi-weekly, that took places in bars, that were in breweries, and those were maybe meetings lasting an hour, hour and a half. Is this usual? Is this recommended? Is it efficient? I mean, I'm sorry, but having a meeting in a brewery, I don't drink beer myself, but come on. Three things on this. First of all, as I've said, the perception on conflict of interest matters. If I receive many requests, I mean, the investigation is underway. I don't know if the people in question were there, but the presence itself of such invitations with vendors, where there's no proof that there was an employee from our side, is something that concerns me. I have questions about this. Mr. Ososki, in your opening remarks, you compared the internal data storage and external data storage offered by Deloitte. I'd like to talk about Amazon Web Services. Is that considered internal or external storage? From what I can see in the documents we've received so far, the applications have to be compatible and use that platform. So is it considered internal or external storage?
Actually, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that.
Okay.
You need someone with a technology background. I mean, I think that the point was that Mr. Dwan was likely making was it was in an instance that was in the government's control as opposed to a private sector entity's instance of where that cloud was, but I really can't comment on the technicalities of that.
Okay.
So you probably remember that during the pandemic, Deloitte was in charge of everything regarding procurement in China. And I'm talking here about cargo shipping, planes, ships, in terms of masks and other PPE for Canada. Now, given this, would Deloitte have been available to work on this web application? Or did they have too much to do in terms of procurement for healthcare and PPE?
Brief answer.
I think that Deloitte was available to provide this outsourced solution that was proposed.
Merci.
Mr. Johns, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for both of you for being here and coming back here, and for the important work that you do and have done for Canada. I just wanted to start with you, Ms. Gorman. I'm going to read from an email Cameron McDonald sent to Ming Don on November 19th, 2019. Cameron says Ming directed him to, quote, look into a specific domain within HR using AI, end quote. He says, quote, I found a company in Montreal and connected with GC Strategies who sought options to move something forward, end quote. That company was Botler AI. So what we have here is a government official saying they clearly identified a solution, but they chose to bring in a middle person to profit off it first. We've seen the direct message that GC Strategies sent to Botler on LinkedIn. That's not professional headhunting that the government can't do itself. It really seems that GC Strategies was brought in as a middle person for no reason at all, except to profit off a taxpayer contract, a taxpayer paid contract. And unless we see evidence to the contrary, that's what this shows. So, Ms. O'Gorman, do you believe this is acceptable? And with many more eyes on CBSA's procurements right now, have you found other cases where this has happened? And what is your plan to figure out whether this is happening in other cases?
Well, note your comment about unless other information comes to the fore. But to your question, I don't agree that that was proper procurement. It was not an unsolicited proposal. The rules allow for prime contractors to sub, and as this committee has heard and asked about, subcontract. It's not for CBSA or a department to try and manage and develop those subcontracts. Those are business decisions between entities in the course of a procurement. So what I have seen, based on the documents that you're referring to, CBSA's involvement in how those contracts would come together is not usual. Looking at other options, CBSA presumably could have put out an RFP for its requirements. It could have looked to justify a sole source. It could have used supply arrangements and pre-qualified. So there were other options. It's not clear to me that what was happening was appropriate. In fact, it appears to be inappropriate. And the spirit of the supply arrangements and standing offers is not to retrofit products through them.
Would this be your rationale for the suspensions then?
The suspensions of the companies?
No, the employees.
I didn't
Mr. McDonald.
I didn't suspend the employees.
Okay, it's my understanding that is Mr. McDonald not suspended?
So neither Mr. McDonald nor Mr. Utano work for the CBSA. I have no authority over them. Their deputy heads have taken action.
Okay, understanding that, what's your plan to figure out whether this is happening in other cases? Have you looked to see if this is taking place in more than this instance?
So twofold. I have the investigation underway, and the investigation is going to canvass all of those issues. And I have a committee set up that's looking at every contract and asking the questions and trying to understand before any approvals are given.
Okay, now that you've got this committee working, has the committee come back to you already and flagged other contracts that are of concern?
So the committee is forward-looking. We are reviewing documents relating to contracts on Arrivecan and the billing around that. To your question, I have the internal investigation that will be canvassing how CBSA was engaging with contractors during this period, not limited to Botler GC strategies. So I look forward to those conclusions. I look forward to...
When do we expect to have those conclusions? I mean, this could run for years, right? We don't want that. We want to make sure that we get results. That's what this committee wants.
I'm very impatient. I need to make sure I don't translate that impatience into undue pressure. I'm trying to preserve the integrity of the investigation. I'm impatient, and I hope that everybody involved will participate so that we can wrap it up as soon as possible. I would hesitate to give a date at this time.
Okay. Mr. Ososki, we've been told that GC Strategies was chosen over Deloitte because Deloitte was in the penalty box, and you commented about that earlier, but it was highlighted that it was for its poor work on the CARM contract. But Mr. Doan says that's not the reason. So why was Deloitte in the penalty box, or are you even aware of why? And what was the nature of the problems with Deloitte's work?
As I said in my opening remarks, the relationship was businesslike and cordial at that time. No one was in the penalty box. I reviewed all the emails, and there's nothing to suggest it was anything different than that. It was normal.
Okay, Ms. O'Gorman, can you comment on that since you're in the current role?
I can't comment about the statements that were made, but I would say that the cordial and business-like relationship continues.
So Deloitte's never been in the penalty box, or in your view, under your watch? And you're not aware of that in the past?
No.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Johns.
Okay.
Mr. Brock, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. O'Gorman, your responses to the questions put to you by my colleague, Ms. Kusie, as to why both Mr. McDonald, who was a Director General of the CBSA, and Mr. Antonio Utano, who was a Vice President of the CBSA, as to why they were suspended without pay. I find your responses to be lacking in clarity. Clearly you know a lot more. We're going to ask you questions about that because Canadians deserve a full, frank answer as to why both of these senior civil servants have been treated in the fashion that they have. And these are extremely unusual circumstances, so much so that the report put forth by Bill Curry in the Globe and Mail was able to speak with the former clerk of the Privy Council office, Mr. Michael Wernick, who said that public finger-pointing by senior servants is highly unusual. He cannot recall any other instance of such public disagreement. Is it an outlier? Yes. Suspensions without pay are also rare. It's a strong measure to suspend without pay while a process is underway and no conclusions have been reached. Usually disciplinary measures follow an investigation being completed, and suspension with pay is more common in the early stages, he said. It's also a very strong measure to suspend or permanently revoke a security clearance. It is tantamount to removing someone from that job and any other job that requires that level of clearance. It is not a common occurrence. Your decisions at the CBSA, as directed and delivered to the other ministries these two individuals have worked for, have destroyed their lives. And Canadians deserve an answer. Parliamentarians deserve an answer as to why due process was not provided to them, that very draconian measures were taken against them. So I'm going to be asking you a number of questions. Who did you speak with, ma'am, on suspending the two public servants on the $54 million Arrivecan app? You said it wasn't your decision, but clearly you participated in the ultimate recommendation that they be removed. Who did you speak with?
That's not accurate at all. I didn't speak to either of their deputy heads about the actions they were taking.
You received a preliminary report from investigators in your department. Did those investigators recommend suspension? No. Who did?
The decisions were taken by the deputy heads. I shared the preliminary statements of fact with their deputy heads.
Well, what did the preliminary statements of fact, how is it so damning against those two individuals that you felt it prudent to pass on to the other ministries?
It included, as the emails that you have received, information about engagements with consultants, a whole series of information that, as their deputy heads, I felt they had a right to have. They did not consult me on their actions.
Why did you claim that they were a national security risk?
I never claimed that.
Were you aware that that was the language that was used in their suspension letters?
I haven't seen their suspension letters.
You're completely blind to that. You had no knowledge of that.
I'm not their deputy head. They don't work
And the
for
deputy
me.
head never spoke to you at all. They alone made that decision?
They alone made that
Is
decision.
your evidence today?
They alone made that decision.
Okay, so identify those deputy heads for us, please. Who are they?
Bob Hamilton is the commissioner of the CRA, and Stephen Lucas is the deputy head of Health Canada.
How many communications did you have with both of those individuals?
I let them know that I would be sharing a, pardon?
How did you let them know? Emails? Telephone call? Letter?
I called them, and I indicated.
When did you call?
When?
When?
Soon after I received it. I received the package the 19th of December.
Follow up with an email?
Possibly.
Okay, you'll provide this committee with any and all manners of communication to those two deputy heads surrounding the preliminary findings from your investigators in your ministry. You can do that?
And the...
You can have that to us within 2 weeks? Okay?
Yep.
Did they communicate back to you?
They told me after the fact, the decision they had taken.
They communicated that they took the decision to suspend without pay.
They informed me that they had taken actions.
Communicated that to you in what manner?
In a phone call, as I recall.
Official, nothing, no email, no letter?
No
Just a
reason
phone
to
call?
inform me officially. They are the deputy heads of those
Right,
employees.
that we're taking the most drastic of
Can you wrap up,
remedies
Mr. Brock?
that we're taking the most drastic of remedies against these two whistleblowers who spoke truth to power, and they only communicated that via telephone.
The employees work for them.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Mr. Baines, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back to Mr. Ososki. You're trying to inform us a little bit about the Arrivecan app and the centralization of it in order for it not to fall through cracks of airport and provincial apps. Could you maybe finish that? I think you were trying to explain
Sorry, let me
something.
interrupt you,
No,
Mr. Baines,
désolé.
for a moment. I'll stop the clock. Madame Vigneault?
Le son est trop mauvais pour l'interprétation et j'aimerais éminemment entendre.
The sound is not good enough for interpretation, and I would like to hear the questions asked by my colleagues. So maybe if he could move his microphone closer to his mouth.
Que je puisse entendre ces questions via l'interprétation, s'il vous plaît.
Can you please move the microphone closer to your mouth so that I can hear the interpretation?
How about now? Is this good?
Is this better?
Could we get him to speak a bit longer just to test?
Can you
Once
speak a bit
again,
longer, Mr. Baines? Just
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci.
We'll go to Mr. Ososki. Are we still good, or a little bit longer?
just keep speaking a bit longer, please, Mr. Baines. Tell us about the Vancouver Canucks, how they're doing this year.
Well, the Vancouver Canucks, as you see, we are very proud to send 5 members of the Vancouver Canucks to the All-Star game, and it looks like we have a Norris candidate in Quinn Hughes, and it looks like we're going to have to pay a lot of money to Elias Pettersson.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Baines. Just bear with us a couple moments while we check with the translation booth. I apologize. We're going to suspend for a couple moments here.
Well, of course they're going to suspend for a little bit. Man. I like how Kusie was laying into that woman. Like, she was getting pretty steamed up in there. I was getting good. I was hoping to keep the feistiness going. For anyone that is new to the channel and is enjoying the channel, please hit the like and subscribe to help trigger that algorithm so that the channel gets more views and more subscribers. There's another committee going on at the same time too in the House of Commons, but we're locked out of it. They're doing it in camera. Whenever you hear a meeting going to be in camera, that means that it's closed off to the public, that you're not allowed to see it. Now, there's still probably a little over an hour of this meeting left, so. Yeah, I think they're fixing something or something like that they have to pause for a moment. You see everything that's going on in Davos right now in Switzerland? The WEF? They got like rebel news stationed outside that's interrogating everybody as they come in. It's hilarious.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ososki, I'm going to go back to you. You are reflecting as on your observation and what you notice when you're going through a number of emails, and you were talking about the reach out to you or the outreach to you around various requirements from various provinces and all of those things. Can you expand on that? And had we not gone with Arrivecan the way we did, what would be potentially the impact?
Thank you for the question. I think the best, when I was looking through my emails, the best way I would describe it is that, and the memories that I were refreshed was the airports were clogged with people trying to fill out paper forms. People then would get garbage bags full of these paper forms and have to digitize them so that information could be passed to provinces. You might recall at some point provinces were looking at checking in on people to see if they're okay. They were trying to make sure that they were enforcing mandatory isolation. Initially, it was done on a sampling basis, and then it moved to something more persistent. I think the initial piece at the airport as well was complicated because you had all these people getting off an airplane all at the same time, and they were concerned, quite frankly, of a super spreading event happening while they were waiting, doing the paper process. So it was logical to sort of look for some way to capture this information in advance if possible. And there was a web-based version of this as well for people who didn't have a mobile app, so that we could capture that very simple information, give it to the provinces, and as well allow the public health agency to do the analytics to say, okay, this person came from this country, this is what variant that turned out to be following the testing. It was much, much more sophisticated and much, much more effective than a paper process.
Yeah, thank you. So the reference to a $54 million bungle is not really true because can you share with us, if you do know, the dollar cost of the development of the application?
I don't have those details, but I remember you asking me a similar question on December 8th of 2022 when I first appeared. And I think at the time, the estimate was the processing of a paper form was about $3 per form, and that the application was, I don't know, I think we talked about 60 million people used the application, or 60 million travelers, and that worked out to about 65 cents per form. But I think I want to take the opportunity, if I may, in terms of the costs of this. Unlike all of the other references this committee has heard to what an app costs to development, we did not know the requirements at the time. We did not have the luxury of weeks of thinking about how do we want to situate this, what are the true business requirements, what data we have. As you can appreciate from my remarks, what we were dealing with was a million different things at once, quite frankly. And this constantly evolved as we brought in new measures, and the Public Health Agency, along with their provincial counterparts, tried to prevent the spread of the disease based on what was coming into the country. And that's where we tried to help them. And so, these references, well, we could have done an app cheaper than this. It was not the same situation by any means whatsoever.
Yeah. Just as a reference for the committee, I believe the development cost of the application with 70 different iteration that was coming on a rapid fire was around $9 million. So the reference to the fact that this application has cost $54 million of development is not factually correct. Quickly going to Ms. O'Gorman, in your opening remarks, you talked about that the investigation had led to information that you shared with other department heads, and then they made the decision that they made. Also, some of our colleagues in the opposite side refer to the statement that you provided was not a true statement. Madam O'Gorman, can you tell us why did you ask for an in-camera meeting as opposed to a public meeting?
As I said, I'm trying to balance information that this committee is seeking with the integrity of investigation that remains ongoing and that hasn't heard from key individuals. So I'm anxious for that to conclude, and I'm very conscious of not prejudicing that investigation. CBSA conducts internal investigations. Individuals who have been subject to those investigations have talked to me about how stressful they can be, whether they're respondents or even witnesses. So I can't imagine the stress that would cause somebody who's subject to an investigation with such a public profile. I'm concerned about people's mental health. I would like the investigation to have the space to conclude, and I would like to protect its integrity. Those were the reasons why I asked.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Jouari, thank you for your flexibility. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Gorman, as far as you know, are there public servants or higher-ups that would have made pressure or pressured people that would have testified in committee? So Mr. McDonald, Mr. Utano, Ms. Duck, would they have been sent cease and desist letters or other legal documents? We should wait for the conclusion of the investigation. In testimonies, different informations have been shared.
I'm not sure I understand what whistles are being blown. I want to get to the bottom of what happened. I have trust in the investigation, and I look forward to it concluding.
S'il y a eu des pressions, c'est en dehors de votre.
And so if there was pressure, that had nothing to do with you, and these people acted of their own volition. They were their own decisions. Yes. During this investigation, did you ask that the investigators meet with everyone involved? Was there a request for meetings? I think that Botler AI was asked to share the information that they had in their possession. I don't know if the team asked to meet with Botler AI. When I read the contract or the call for tenders, I saw that there were some linguistic demands and that everything was done in English. They were asked to work in English only. And French, when it is mentioned, which is quite rare, there's a conditions. So you could have to work bilingually. So not only in French, but in a bilingual manner, whereas English is mandatory. So Chinese programmers, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, Russian programmers only program in English as well? Or can we hire specialists that speak another language?
We didn't leave enough time for an answer, but perhaps you can get back to that next round. Mr. Johns, please, for 2.5.
Yeah, Ms. O'Gorman, can you please tell me the date in which CBSA officials commenced the internal investigation into Botler's allegations, as well as the date in which the Botler task authorization was canceled?
Back. The investigation was late fall in November, I believe. I don't know the exact date, and I don't know when the task authorization was canceled. That was before I was at the agency.
Okay, I thought Mr. McDonald said that the investigation started in January, but I'll go to the next question. I have a few questions about Mr. McDonald's claims that CBSA was covering his and Mr. Utano's legal fees. When did CBSA begin covering their fees with private legal counsel? Who made that decision? And does this include legal fees related to the RCMP investigation for McDonald and Utano?
So I'm going to speak generally about covering legal fees. There are criteria in terms of determining whether legal fees should be covered. The criteria are different for appearances before parliamentary committees and legal investigations. Any requests that I received to cover legal fees were consistent with the policy.
Okay. Do you recognize the concerns and the conflict of interest in using taxpayer dollars to fund the private legal counsel of the same individuals who are under investigation by the RCMP, by this committee, and by your own agency?
So I'll just clarify. I don't know if anybody is under investigation by the RCMP. I have no information about that one way or the other. I applied the Treasury Board policy on legal fees for public servants.
Okay. So can you explain why the Department of Justice wasn't taking the lead in terms of providing counsel? And also, just lastly, I'm going to ask you if you could table the date in which the internal investigation into Botler's allegations were made, if you could table that to this committee.
I'm reading. I'm looking for all that.
We can provide that.
Sorry. We can provide that in writing?
We can provide the date. And to your other question about legal fees, can you repeat the question?
Why wasn't the counsel being provided by the Department of Justice?
I will speak generally about the process and...
Just briefly, please.
So I applied the policy, and it does contemplate whether there's a conflict of interest that's in the policy. It sets out the considerations to be made.
Thanks very much. Mr. Barrett, please.
Mr. Gorman, in your calendar, there are multiple visits to the address 80 Wellington. And while this building is on Wellington Street, it's not 80 Wellington. 80 Wellington is the Prime Minister's office. These visits are interspersed or spaced around your times appearing at Arrivecan hearings for the Government Operations Committee. For example, before your appearance at the Government Operations Committee on the 24th of October in last year, you visited the Prime Minister's office at 2 p.m., then walked across the street and sat down to take questions. The next morning, you were back at the Prime Minister's office. Who did you meet with in these meetings?
Met with the Prime Minister. The Privy Council office is in that building. I would have been at 80 Wellington to attend meetings with colleagues in the Privy Council office.
So none of your meetings at 80 Wellington had any relation to the Arrivecan scandal or your testimony at this committee?
No. I have spoken to colleagues in the Privy Council office about Arrivecan. Certainly there's a big public profile to Arrivecan. They've had questions, but you're linking specific meetings and specific appearances here that have no relation to one another. I have come to give this testimony free of putting anything by anybody else. So the suggestion that I would have been meeting with the Privy Council office in advance of this meeting is not accurate. My calendar shows many, many meetings at 80 Wellington.
You did meet with people at that office before this meeting, so it is accurate to suggest that. It's an assertion of fact. So you just said it's inaccurate to say that you met there before this meeting. You did, ma'am.
Not on Arrivecan.
Okay. Well, it's certainly interesting that your appearances at the Privy Council office or the Prime Minister's office are directly around your appearances at this committee.
You'll see many, many meetings at 80 Wellington around all sorts of other meetings.
You said you spoke to colleagues in the Privy Council office about this meeting. Did you speak about your testimony at this committee with folks at PCO?
I didn't say that I met with colleagues about this meeting, but I did indicate that I was coming. I indicated that I was coming, and I shared my opening remarks with them. They didn't, they acknowledged receipt.
On October 13th, 2022, there was a meeting in your calendar that was Procurement Services Canada and CBSA on Arrivecan, PSPC and CBSA Arrivecan. Did you attend that meeting?
Can you say the title of the meeting again?
October 13th, 2022, PSPC and CBSA Arrivecan. Did you attend the meeting?
I don't recollect if it was in my calendar. I likely did, but I don't recollect that meeting in particular.
Well, it seems that the meeting would have been important to your committee strategy because we have an email on October 21st where it stated, quote, both PSPC and CBSA push to have all departments do remarks if they can for time management and putting our narrative out there. So it seems like there was a time management strategy developed. It relates directly to your appearance at committee. Do you have any recollection of it now with that having been offered?
Sorry.
Would you be able to table for this committee? Would you be able to table for this committee the prep materials that you would have had, or a slide deck? Do you have the title of the slide deck on lessons learned, Arrivecan lessons learned? Are you familiar with that document?
I am.
Could you table that with the committee?
I believe if it's the one I'm thinking of, it was presented to the Treasury Board. But yes, I can.
You undertake to provide that to the committee? Thank you. The PCO in the documents that we reviewed also said that they wanted to review all documentation being requested by the committee. Was PCO involved with any of the redactions to the documents? CBSA was non-compliant with a legal order of this committee to provide full documents, and we want to know if PCO was involved in the restricting of the release of information that was lawfully requested by this standing committee.
CBSA makes redactions to its own documents.
So what was PCO's interest then in reviewing all of the documentation before it was being submitted to the committee?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Sousa, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for being here today. Mr. O'Gorman, have Botler cooperated in discussions? Have you had any discussions with any of the principals?
I've not spoken personally with either of the principals. As I said, we invited them to provide any material that was pertinent to the investigation. I have received 3 letters from Ms. Dutt over the course of my time here. I have not spoken to her personally.
Yeah, and so some of the concerns the committee has is the way it was proceeding, or it took shape, as you've rightly noted in your opening remarks, that they didn't actually have a contract. In fact, we're not really certain still as to what they were prepared to do or what was being asked of them, given that they were being proactive in their presentation to government, and nor did GC Strategies have a contract. I know that was some inference made to that. Can you explain what is developed here in your mind?
Recognizing that there will be further information and an internal investigation, based on the information that I've seen, there was engagement with officials from CBSA, GC Strategies, Botler, Coredex, and Dalian, getting involved in how the work of Botler would be brought to bear at CBSA.
And that is what was presented to the RCMP. Am I not mistaken on that? That's what was given to them?
The allegations by Botler were passed to the RCMP.
And none of that is anything to do with Arrivecan. Is that correct? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the answer. I can't hear. Mr. Chair, I think okay. So RCMP is not investigating Arrivecan, but you are. You're taking initial steps. Is that correct? Is that what this committee is being apprised of?
Investigation is looking into procurement practices at CBSA, following on, frankly, the allegations that were provided by Botler. So Botler brought to the attention of myself some allegations that, if founded, would be extremely serious. Those were the basis for the launch of the investigation, and the investigation is pursuing the information, I assume, based on what it is seeing and hearing in terms of the people they talk to and the documents they obtain.
Right. And so your disclosure and your engagement is to try to uncover as much as possible what has taken place. You're not trying to hide anything. You're actually trying to uncover more.
I want to understand what happened, and I want to protect the integrity of the investigation and give it the time and space it needs to conclude.
Mr. Ososki, can you position what occurred at that time given the urgency of the pandemic?
Back to the creation of the app?
Yes.
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, it was an incredibly tense moment in history, certainly in the history of the Border Services Agency. No one, I don't believe, before me had ever shut down the border before, and still tried to make sure that commercial trade and essential food and medicine was coming across. And I was spending a lot of time with my American colleagues to make sure that the messaging was the same. They've got a different legal construct in terms of how airports work, but the land border was the primary concern, given that's where most of the commercial trade comes through to Canada and back and forth.
So it was a massive urgency, a massive border, one of the largest, I guess, in the world. And you had an issue of public safety at the forefront. And now some are suggesting maybe there was too many, or there were some shortcomings in the way things were processed. Can you explain were there any shortcomings in your view?
The application development was processed?
Yes. And the procurement.
Look, as I said in my opening remarks, we got the request, and 4 days later, my team had put together mock-ups of what the application could look like. So we already had some basic capabilities on this in the organization, but to do something as quickly and get things approved through an app store, both Android and Apple, was going to require extra help. The team had something ready to go for a soft launch. I believe it was in the middle of April or just towards the end of April, and then it was fully launched. So it was a very, very tight time frame. Absolutely not normal in terms of the normal way we would procure any IT project or anything like this. And so were we running at 150 miles an hour? Absolutely. But this was a pandemic. People were dying. I think I remember at the time when we shut the border, 100,000 people had died.
I have to cut you off there, Mr. Ososki. Thanks, Mr. Sousa. Mr. Genuis, over to you, please.
So, Ms. O'Gorman,
two senior public servants involved in the Arrivecan affair, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Otano, provided highly detailed and critical testimony to this committee on November the 7th, 2023, about what happened in Arrivecan. They didn't toe the line. They were very critical of you directly, as well as of Mr. Doan, and indirectly, I think, of Minister Mendicino. My impression was that they did not intend to be critical in particular, but they simply provided direct and forthright answers to direct questions. And we would welcome that from others as well. But in any event, after their testimony, immediately after their testimony, it seems that you ordered an investigation related to their conduct. Is that correct? You didn't order any investigation after their testimony? Their dismissal letters say that on November 27th, 2023, they were made aware of investigation by the Canadian Border Services Agency. Were they made aware of an investigation on November 27th, 2023?
So in the course of conducting an investigation, at some point, individuals, if there are allegations against them, are formally informed of those allegations. So I think
they
what
were
you're referring
informed.
to
They were informed of that they were the subject of an investigation regarding serious allegations of misconduct, allegedly. They were informed of that on November 27th, suspiciously, just a few weeks after their testimony before this committee. So are you claiming that that information was related to investigation that was actually launched prior to their testimony? Well, when was that investigation launched?
There's one investigation that was launched in November of 2022.
So, but then they were informed of what? The expansion of that investigation, a part of that investigation, or they were simply informed that they were the subject of particular complaints on November 27, 2023?
My understanding is they were informed of the allegations against them. So there was the information.
Were these new allegations or allegations that had been long-standing?
So Botler AI presented allegations to the agency. The investigation that has been followed is consistent with any investigation undertaken by CBSA. And
Ma'am, I'd like direct responses here. What I'm trying to understand is that a couple weeks after their appearance before this committee, they were informed of serious investigation into their own conduct. You're telling us that it just so happened that there were new revelations related to an ongoing investigation.
There's new revelations. The investigation.
But then why were they only told of this on November 27th? Was information simply kept from them for a long time? Because you'd have to agree the timing is a little bit odd, isn't it?
I don't agree with that. The
Really?
investigation has been carried out consistent with our investigations. I have not spoken to the investigators. The process is such that when
Okay, ma'am. So
are subject
pure
to-
coincidence. They come on November 7th. They are very critical of you personally. And then 2 weeks later, slightly more, they are told that they are under a cloud of investigation, and subsequently you send a preliminary finding of fact to their bosses, which lead to them both being suspended without pay, all in a few months succession after their appearance at this testimony. Their legal support is withdrawn as a result of a decision you made, which you claim is in keeping with Treasury Board guidelines. All of this in weeks and months immediately after they came and criticized you at this committee. And you're telling us that that's pure coincidence. Is that what you're telling us?
Is the suggestion that I'm interfering in the investigation? Because there is no information to support that.
Ma'am, I'm pointing out the timeline. But here's what I would like you to do. I'd like you to provide the preliminary statement of fact that you provided to their superiors to this committee within 48 hours. Will you undertake to do that?
I'll say two things.
No. Will you provide that document?
The preliminary statement of fact.
Will you provide that document,
is
ma'am?
a point in time.
Will you
and
provide that
I'm conscious
document?
of my
No,
obligation
I'm asking you a
under the
question.
Act, And right now,
You know, ma'am, you talk about your concern about the integrity of the investigation, but you have told this committee, you've chosen to publicly testify that you believe that Mr. Utano and Mr. McDonald have behaved inappropriately. You have said that on the record at the same time as claiming you don't want to compromise the investigation. And you made the decision to send those letters immediately after they gave testimony at this committee critical of you. So if you won't answer my question, I hope the committee will agree with me to order the production of that preliminary statement of fact that you sent to the superiors of Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, and I'd put it to the committee that we order the production of those documents within 48 hours. That's not a question. That's to the chair.
Okay,
because I think I'm out of time. And
we are, but I will ask colleagues, are we fine? Mr. Jawari, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, the same comment as I did yesterday with Mr. Gorjon. If we can have it in writing, both official languages, I would appreciate that. And as usual, we always support the any type of production of document.
Sorry, I've stated it clearly. Je peux dire le même en français.
I can say the same in French. We have interpretation services.
Preliminary statement of fact that Ms. O'Gorman sent to the direct bosses of Mr. McDonald, Mr. Utano, that led to their suspension. I'm requesting that the committee order the production of those documents.
I'm going to interrupt because we're out of time. We're going to try and get that translated and sent around, and perhaps we can address it in a bit later in the meeting. So we'll get the translation sent around to everyone. If you could just provide and separate to our clerk exactly what you're looking for so we can move forward on that. Mr. Baines, we will... Go ahead, Ms. Atwood. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but Mr. Genuis, if you can just lean back from the mic a little bit when you're speaking. It's hard on our ears, and I'm sure it's hard on interpretation. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks. We'll pass it on. Mr. Baines, we'll try you again. Hopefully IT thinks they've got you fixed, so we'll go ahead. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm hoping everybody can hear me correctly now, and translation and everything's okay. All good?
So far, so good. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Ms. O'Gorman. If you can, so we know Arrivecan is not being investigated. As you're aware, the Office of the Auditor General has been working on a report of Arrivecan. And last she was here, she was disappointed that this matter had not been brought to her attention. Are you keeping in good contact with her office to make sure she has what she needs for her work?
Yeah, that was my decision not to provide that to the Auditor General at the time because the allegations related to another contract. In hindsight, I recognize they were the same individuals and they were the same company. I probably ought to have informed them of that, including the caveats that we knew nothing further. We have appreciated the work with the Auditor General. Our teams have worked closely with them. I look forward to her report, and I expect that she'll have some good recommendations.
So you're referencing, you said same individuals, same companies. Can you name them, please?
As they've been named here, GC Strategies among the companies, and the individuals have already been named as well and are included in the email disclosure that was in the package that I provided.
So procurement practices at CBSA is ultimately what we're looking at, what you're looking at. So in light of what we've been hearing at committee these past months, do you have faith in your organization's ability overall to follow fair procurement practices? Like everything that we've heard, do you think the system is working and the practices that you're trying to either improve, or are you seeing some changes, or you're bringing changes forward? If you can maybe share something on that.
In confidence in the people at CBSA, absolutely. CBSA does a lot of procurement of goods, of services. There are no specific concerns I have. As regards contracting, staff augmentation, information technology, I have seen that, in some cases, files were not complete. I've seen engagements with vendors, with contractors that didn't involve procurement officials, unclear roles and responsibilities. That's what I'm looking to fix.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to Mr. Ososki. As you know, like part of our role here as members of OGGO is to provide recommendations to government. Has your experience in this process, what you've witnessed here and your appearance here, led to any insights or recommendations that could improve the procurement process?
The question. I would say I'm not privy to all of the information that certainly might come up from the Auditor General's work or the Procurement Ombudsman, but I'm certain that the agency would receive and the government would receive any recommendations to improve procurement gratefully.
Okay, thank you. And for the federal information technology projects such as Arrivecan, and I think we've determined here, and from what you've mentioned earlier also, it was developed in record time and under dire circumstances and ultimately saved money when you were talking about how the process was in paper form and people filling out and the time saved and do you feel that that was good value for taxpayers' dollars, the decision that was being made at that time?
And so as I mentioned, I don't think anyone could have predicted how many iterations and versions of the app there would be and all of the different tools that were built into it for things like vaccine certificates and holding people's healthcare information and personal information. So it was something that started off as a very modest, simple application to take contact tracing information and pass that along, and it grew into something incredibly sophisticated. And so from that perspective and what I was talking about with Mr. Jawari, I think it was definitely more effective than a paper-based process. In retrospect, if this were to happen again, I'm sure there's lessons learned about how we would do this better. But other than that, I don't have any comment.
That is our time. Thanks, Mr. Baines. Thank you again for your flexibility. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ososki, when did the pandemic start officially in Canada?
That I would have to go back and check, but somewhere in the middle of March 2020.
Yes. And in the emails that we received, we were told about MOBO. I think that stands for Mobile Border, as early as 2019. So is Mobile Border the predecessor of Arrivecan? Was this project already underway before the pandemic?
Don't recollect the details of the mobile border. I think that was actually for officers to use internally so that they had something as a mobile tool to use when they were going on tour buses. But I would have to go back and check with the agency on that one. Perhaps Ms. O'Gorman knows.
Madame O'Gorman, I have a question about language. I won't repeat what I said before, but language C, C++, a specialist can be francophone from the Quebec or another Canadian province and wouldn't be able to speak English perfectly. I know unilingual Anglophones who still make mistakes in English. So why require English when your public servants are supposed to be bilingual and supposed to be able to communicate in both official languages with different contractors? There's a difference between bilingualism in applications and services given to Canadians and internal work for IT employees. According to my understanding, the working language that is most commonly used is English. In the market, the working language is English. And that is why when we wrote up that request, we made the knowledge of the English language a mandatory requirement. Most people who work within IT work in English. Concepts are discussed in English. Unfortunately,
I'm sorry. Mr. Johns, over to you, please.
First, I want to give Ms. O'Gorman just a really quick chance to respond to Mr. Jenius's question. She wasn't given a chance to reply. I wanted to know if she wanted to take that opportunity.
I would just say that CBSA is conducting this investigation in the same way that it conducts all investigations. And that's very important, and it's important for the people of CBSA to see that we don't do things differently based on people's levels. And so the team is carrying out the investigation. There are established steps supported by jurisprudence. I'm not involved in talking to the investigators. I am certainly not directing anything related to that investigation. I receive updates. When I received a document, I shared it with the relevant deputy heads. So we are conducting that investigation in a way that is absolutely consistent with others. The public profile is certainly making it a challenge. We want to wrap it up quickly, and we want all those involved to participate in the investigation, meet with the investigators. Thank you for the opportunity to make that clear.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to move a motion. It's a procedural motion from last meeting, and the motion reads, and it's been circulated in both official languages, that the clerk inform Von Brennan that the committee sends for all records of communications from January 1st, 2019 through the present between Von Brennan and Ritika Dutt, Amir Morv, and any other persons acting as or on behalf of Botler AI, including communications by email, call, text message, or any other method, and that the information be provided to the clerk of the committee no later than 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 1st, 2024.
Thanks. Mr. Johns, just to confirm, this is the one you had brought forward yesterday?
Yes.
Mr. Sousa, your hand's up. Is it on this issue or?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr.
Say that we will support this motion.
Agreed. Thanks very much. Consider it done, Mr. Johns. Thanks very much for your patience with that. And you've got about 5 seconds left, so.
I'd like to move another motion, Mr. Chair, if I could. This motion I'd like to speak to as well.
One second, Mr. Johns. Mr. Johns, you're basically out of time. Can you do it in we have one more round coming up. Could you do it in the last round, please?
Okay, it's my understanding that I can move motions in my time and it suspends.
You were actually out of time, but I said the 5 seconds, but could you save it for the next round, please?
Okay.
We will have time in the meeting, though. You don't have to worry.
Okay,
we're not going to finish right at 3.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Mr. Please.
A hard time reconciling the fact that you said you were at the Prime Minister's department, but it wasn't about Arrivecan, but it was immediately before your appearance here. And when pressed in my questions to you, you said that you focus grouped your opening remarks to your colleagues who work in the Prime Minister's department at that allegedly unrelated meeting. I find it hard to believe. I think Canadians would find that hard to believe. Who was there from the Prime Minister's office at that meeting?
I've not met with anybody from the Prime Minister's office.
Who was at that meeting who works in the Prime Minister's office?
If you mean the building, I was meeting with Privy Council office officials.
My question is very clear. You were at a meeting. It's in your calendar. You acknowledged that you were at the meeting. Was there anyone from the Prime Minister's office in attendance at that meeting? There was no one. Okay, so it was just PCO that you focus grouped your remarks for this committee with.
Focus group, I provided them.
On page 180 of the emails that you provided to this committee, it talks about time management strategy for your appearance before this committee, and that PCO wanted to review all the documentation being requested by this committee, something else that you seem unaware of. So you're taking meetings immediately before and immediately after your appearance at this committee with the Prime Minister's department, PCO. They're reviewing all of the documentation that's coming from your office, your department, which illegally illegally refused document production orders of this committee, and you're telling us that all of these meetings at PCO that are happening directly around your appearances at this committee are unrelated, and though you do acknowledge that you did circulate your opening remarks in advance, but there was no discussion at this allegedly unrelated meeting. Do I understand that correctly?
I'm not even sure where to begin to answer that. So I've attended meetings at...
To start.
Absolutely.
And that'd be a wonderful change.
I have been absolutely honest and forthright with this committee. So the meeting you're asking about preceded my previous appearance at OGGO? Is that the meeting?
Sure, I'm not getting an answer. I'll give the rest of my time to my colleague.
Mr. Gorman, given the extremely seriousness of this matter, with both the RCMP and the Auditor General now investigating this boondoggle of the Arrivecan app, procurement, and the $54 million cost, you surely, as the president of the CBSA, would be keeping your minister, Dominic LeBlanc, the Minister of Public Safety, fully apprised of all developments. Is that correct?
I informed the minister that I had received preliminary statements of fact that were of concern and that I was providing them to the deputy heads.
Did you provide Minister LeBlanc with a copy of those findings?
No.
Why not?
I didn't think that he didn't ask for it.
How many meetings have you had with Minister LeBlanc with respect to this investigation?
We've had no meetings. I called him to inform him.
How many calls have you had with him?
On the one call.
How many emails have you shared with Dominic LeBlanc?
I sent him one email.
Previous to Dominic LeBlanc was Marco Mendicino in that role as the Minister of Public Safety. Did you communicate with him as well?
I called him to inform him of the allegations I received.
And his response was?
He was concerned with the nature of them. He expressed his expectation that I would shore up any gaps and informed me that I should keep him apprised if there were any developments that he needed to be aware of.
All your communications, were they via telephone or email?
I don't recall emailing the previous minister. I may have.
You will look back at your email chain with respect to both ministers, and you'll provide copies to this committee within 7 days. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, last question. Lying before this committee has become a serious problem with a number of witnesses. It's almost a culture of lying and deceit. Although you've not been sworn to tell the truth, there's a presumption you are telling the truth when you appear at committee. Mr. McDonald, the now suspended public servant over the Arrivecan app, said that you lied, specifically targeting you for mistruths that you provided to committee this past fall. Have you told the committee the truth and nothing but the truth today?
I have told the committee the answers to the questions truthfully and to the best of my recollection.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. We're going to Ms. Atwood now, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one quick question for Mr. Gorman, and then I'll be directing most of my questions to Mr. Ososki. I just have one piece that I'm confused about when the contract was canceled with Botler. Was it due to issues with deliverables, or was it because of the misconduct allegations that it came forward?
My understanding is that it was canceled because CBSA didn't feel that it had a need to continue with the contract. I don't know the details. I don't know who made that decision, but that's my understanding.
Okay. Mr. Ososki, I don't know if you have any additional comment to that.
Thank you for the question. No, in fact, I have no recollection of the contract or the task authorizations with Botler. The meeting I had with them where I got the demo was my interaction with them, and there were some subsequent emails back and forth that we talked to about the last time I appeared, but that's it. I wasn't involved in the task authorizations.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to to remind kind of our whole committee about the Treasury Board contracting policy. So ideally, we want government contracting to be conducted in a manner that will stand the test of public scrutiny in matters of prudence and probity, facilitate access, encourage competition, and reflect fairness in the spending of public funds. So in other words, fair, open, and transparent. So Mr. Ososki, in your view, has scrutiny of the Arrivecan procurement process or allegations of wrongdoing from Botler revealed any shortcomings of the federal integrity regime for public procurement?
So I've retired, and those investigations have started by both internally that Ms. Gorman is doing within the agency, and then the Procurement Ombudsman and the Auditor General. I'm sure that they will find things that could be improved in the process, but I think that should be caveated with what was happening at that particular point in time.
Okay, thank you. It's been argued at this committee and in the news that staffing firms like GC Strategies bring no added value to government projects like the Arrivecan app, yet they received contracts worth millions of dollars for this specific project. Can you explain, just in your point of view, what value, if any, staffing firms bring to government projects?
I think you've heard testimony. Thank you for the question. I think you've heard testimony from several witnesses that getting qualified to access the government contracting regime is burdensome and complicated. It's not just about security screening. There's all kinds of things around intellectual property and access to buildings, and it's very hard for small individual firms to do this on their own. So they go to these staffing agencies, these people that have specific skills and talent, and they make themselves available to these firms who do qualify to provide these services. The government uses these services regularly for unique skill sets. Mr. Johns has been on record that public servants should be doing this, and I agree. I think, quite frankly, that if I had to have a recommendation around this, is that public servants should be doing what I would call run, which is maintaining the systems, patches, things like that, and the private sector should be used for bringing in innovation. And that's where there's probably a shift that I think would be beneficial.
Excellent, thank you. And Mr. Barrett alluded to a potential document called Lessons Learned, Arrivecan. Just in your opinion, again, and based on your experience, even with this committee, what lessons has CBSA or should CBSA have learned from the Arrivecan project regarding the use of intermediaries like GC Strategies or in process in general? What lessons can we learn from this?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think that all of the investigations and audits that are being conducted right now will yield all kinds of lessons learned for the agency to take on hand, and I'm sure that they will.
Great, thank you. And lastly, is there anything that you would have done personally different in this situation, in hindsight, right? We have the, hindsight 2020, we could look back and fix things. Would you personally have done anything different as the acting president?
And I'll start with a bit of a joke. I'd wish I'd never opened up the president of Public Health Agency's email asking for an app. But that said, look, we were moving very, very quickly. Everybody was making their best efforts to respond to the Public Health Agency's requirements here to get this information. I'm grateful, and I'm very proud of what the agency did during that period of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And back to Mr. Genuas, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I ask both of our witnesses just very briefly? Min Doan has said he's proud of the Arrivecan app. Is that your position as well? Are you both proud of the Arrivecan app?
Yes, I'm very proud of the app, and I'll, if I may, I would just expand on that a little bit.
I don't have a huge amount of time, so you're giving
very quickly. The future of travel, and many countries are doing this, are all reliant on an application of this type of nature. Getting advanced information on people is critical.
Okay.
To
I mean, my question was about the Arrivecan app specifically, but go ahead, Ms. O'Gorman. Thank you for your response, Mr. Ososki.
Continue to use it on a voluntary basis. About 300,000 travelers a month are using it.
Are you proud of it?
It worked. It performed. It did its job.
It's just yes or no. Are you proud of it?
Yes.
Okay. Back to my previous line of questioning. So Ms. O'Gorman, I think you understand that when it comes to issues of conflict of interest, public servants have to avoid the reality and the appearance of conflict of interest. And I think a similar principle would apply to professional retaliation, that it's important to avoid the reality and the appearance of people facing professional retaliation for speaking to this committee. By analogy, sometimes the horse's head is in the bed just because it's a convenient place to put it, but more often than not, it might be interpreted as a message. We had at this committee on November 7th, Mr. McDonald testifying that you and that CBSA lied about who was responsible for choosing GC strategies. 20 days after that, they received a letter saying that they were under investigation. And this was a new letter to them. And then about a month after that, they were advised that you had made the decision that their legal fees would not be covered. So you can tell us that that was not professional retaliation for their testimony before the committee. And whether it was purely intended as retaliation or not requires us to assess your motivation, something that's obviously difficult to do externally. But don't you think it obviously looks like retaliation and would likely have the effect of chilling public servants who would otherwise be interested in and willing to come before this committee and give honest, frank testimony? The fact that so shortly after their testimony, you made the decision to pull the support for their legal fees, and that they received a letter saying they were under investigation, which led them to be suspended from their jobs without pay. Does that not have the appearance, at least, of professional retaliation against them in their careers as a result of testimony they gave to the Government Operations Committee?
Yeah. Sorry, let me just interrupt. Mr. Sousa, do you have a point of order?
Yeah, if Mr. Jennings could just sort of step back a bit. It's hard to, it's very staticky when he speaks so close to the mic.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Or go ahead.
My question was to the witness. Go ahead.
I'm not retaliating against anybody. I'm trying to find out what happened.
Do you think it looks like retaliation, that these events happened to occur that had severe negative implications for their career immediately following their testimony before this committee?
I'm confident that all decisions that were taken by the accountable people. You reference legal
I'm
fees.
confident that you're not answering the questions, though. This isn't my first committee hearing, and this isn't your first committee hearing. My question was, would you not agree that this looks like a scheme to retaliate and punish public servants who were critical of you, your leadership, and others within CBSA?
You're suggesting that it is, and I'm telling you that I'm not retaliating against anybody.
I don't really believe you, but in any event, it sure looks that way. Can you provide some other explanation as to why, immediately after they came to this committee, they said they were threatened by other public servants and that nothing was done on that? They said that you and others had lied to this committee. And then you're the one who gets to decide whether or not the department covers their legal fees. And you, perhaps unsurprisingly, make the decision to pull their legal fees. Doesn't that look like you made a decision to punish people that criticized you at a parliamentary committee?
I approved their legal fees for their first appearance. I received no request.
Yes, you approved their legal fees before they appeared. And they're coming back to this committee. I'll give it to you in a moment. They came to this committee. They were supported with their legal fees before they appeared. But after you heard what they said, you pulled their support. And next time they come before this committee, they will not have the support for their legal fees as a result of a decision you made. Because now you know what they're going to say. Is that not the case, ma'am?
They have not asked for legal support for their appearance, and they have been encouraged to make that request so that I can render an answer for that. They have not asked for legal fees for their appearance before this committee coming up.
Thank you very much. We're going now to back to Mr. Baines, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I was ceding my time to Ms. Atwin.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, we've talked a lot. We've kind of gone in circles a little bit on some of these questions today. But I want to thank our witnesses for your patience, your tenacity. And I mean, it hasn't been easy. And I'd like to caution also some of our colleagues in the committee for some of the harshness of their words and insinuations. We really need to be careful about how we conduct ourselves, and we need to treat our witnesses with respect because they've given their time to come here today. And again, I think each of us wants to get to the bottom of this, and I think that's what the point is, what we're trying to do, and I think it can be done in a manner that's becoming of parliamentarians. So in saying that, Ms. O'Gorman, I asked Mr. Ososki, if he would have done anything different during that experience. But where you're here in the seat now, you're in this important role. You've already initiated some key changes around procurement moving forward, which I think is great. Are there any other lessons you can take away from this?
I think every day the people of CBSA are doing outstanding work. I'm very concerned about the public nature of this investigation. I ask myself whether anything could have been done. It was duly provided to the professional standards people who have undertaken an investigation. I've assured myself that the process is consistent with any investigations they would undertake in the CBSA. I need the people of the agency to have confidence in these processes. That is my absolute preoccupation. We have discussions about accountability, about values and ethics. The people of CBSA are doing excellent work, and it's an organization of accountability. People in CBSA, frontline officers, take decisions every day, and they have those decisions tested in court. It's an organization that understands accountability. I'm trying to get to the bottom of what happened. I'm impatient to do so, and I regret that the people involved have to have the added stress of the public aspect of this. I look forward to a final investigation, and as I've said, I will take any additional actions that support any of the findings of that.
Thank you. And do you have any kind of general comments, just as a witness, as someone appearing before a parliamentary committee like this? How has your experience been?
It's difficult to be accused of lying in a general sense. As I said, I have provided truthful testimony. I have provided and continue to provide the materials that were requested, and I stand ready to continue answering questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Ososki, now that you're, again, kind of on the other side of things, I think about what lessons for us that you'd really like us to learn. I kind of asked this question, but as far as recommendations moving forward, we got a couple of reports we're looking forward to. We've got the Auditor General's report. There's a look into procurement processes more broadly as far as the Ombuds report. But I'm wondering, for us, what's the main takeaway? What do you want us to have, taken from these few months of discussions, kind of the back and forth exchanges? What can we do better as committee members and as parliamentarians?
The question, I think the only thing I would offer is that to my colleague Aaron's point is that these processes take time, and that the committee is hungry for all kinds of answers and information, and I totally understand that. But I think there's an appropriate balance to be struck in terms of ensuring a fair process for all the people involved. And so I think there's some thought that could be given to that in terms of the demands of information versus the due process that needs to unfold.
Thank you. And Mr. Gorman, you alluded to the idea that we need to have, faith in disciplinary processes as well. We need to be assured, each of us, that if there's wrongdoing, that there will be, you'll have to meet, the decisions, and you'll have to feel the repercussions of that. And I have faith that that's going to happen. And I'm just wondering, do you have faith that that will happen as well?
That will happen.
Great. Well, that's all my questions. Thank you very much.
Just on time. Thanks very much, Mrs. Vignola, for your final 2.5.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to complete the comment I was making earlier. When in the language requirement, there is a requirement to be Anglophone and the option to be a Francophone. It sends a message. The message sent to Franco-Canadians and Quebecers who are specialized in this field is that regardless of their skills and capacity in the field, it will never be enough. And that Canada is willing to miss out on someone that could be a specialist in their field because they have to speak English. And it's not just in technology. There's a requirement for English in so many fields. The message is that Canada is willing to pass on this specialist in their field because they simply don't speak, quote unquote, the right language. That's the message this government has been sending in so many fields. So it should be taken into account. There are Spanish specialists, Japanese specialists, all of whom don't speak English, who work in technology and IT at very high levels. So that's my comment. I just think it should be taken into account. Now, here's my question. Do the same teams usually work with the same vendors? For instance, Arrivecan and Botler AI. Is this standard practice given the nature of these contracts? I don't know if I can give you a definitive answer. It has to do with perception. Microphone was off and audible. Now, talking about lawyers, given that Mr. Itano and Mr. McDonald no longer work for CBSA, that they've moved on to 2 other organizations, why are you still in charge of authorizing the payment of their lawyer fees? Because the case is linked to activities that took place while they were working for the agency. And so these people's lawyers have sent letters to other witnesses in this case telling them to speak up or to not talk? Is it possible that it could have happened? If it did, I have not been informed.
Go ahead, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I'm going to get back to the opportunity to table that motion. I put 3 motions on notice. The first motion I'd like to move and I'd like a chance to speak to that motion, and it's timely today, given that the SIBA loan extension ends today. So this motion, I'm going to read it into the record, given that 900,000 small businesses in Canada risk closing because of the government's unwillingness to extend the SIBA repayment deadline, that the committee report the following to the House within the first 5 sitting days following the adoption of this motion, that it is in the opinion of the committee that the government should extend the loan repayment period, including the deadline for accessing partial loan forgiveness, for at least another year to ensure small businesses can continue supporting local economies and good-paying jobs. Mr. Chair, if I could speak to the motion now.
Yep, go ahead. I've started a speaking list. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, Mr. Chair, this is the deadline. It is today that, we know that there's 200,000 loans at businesses that CFIB's identified that just can't pay the loan, that won't be able to meet the deadline today. These are businesses that close their doors to protect public health. And you've heard me at the committee cite that the PBO costed out what the 1-year extension would cost, and it's actually roughly about 4.2% decrease of outsourcing costs to the highly paid consulting firms that are getting contracts with the government. This is outsourcing that has doubled under the Conservative government when they were in power and gone up 4-fold under the Liberal government. So, Mr. Chair, 4.2% decrease in outsourcing would cover the cost of the extension. Small businesses and their workers are the backbone of the Canadian economy. They provide good-paying jobs with flexibility and familiarity that aren't possible in many corporate settings and jobs in rural and remote places where other work just isn't available. They aren't giant businesses full of corporate headquarters in Courtenay or Bowser. So many of my constituents are employed by small and medium-sized businesses. They hold up the local economy, provide essential goods and services, give locals much greater commerce options. And in every community in Canada, small and medium-sized businesses are essential to the culture and community. They sell local goods. They provide community-centered services. They offer meeting places and celebration spots. They offer artists a chance to share their work and fund their passion. During the pandemic, like I said, small businesses around the country stepped up. They closed their doors to protect public health. They lost income for long periods to save Canadian lives. They took on losses to keep their workers employed. And it's not just COVID. They faced so many hardships in the last few years, from supply chain issues to climate emergencies, like the fires in my riding of Courtenay, Alberni. And many of these small businesses were operating already on razor-thin margins. And with so much lost revenue over the last few years, they need help catching up. They closed their doors to protect public health, and many of them took on losses to keep their workers employed. Communities, especially rural ones, depend on local business, and so do the people employed by them. The SIBA program has been an absolute lifeline for these businesses, and we need to make sure it doesn't turn into an even worse hardship for them. Data from CFIB, like I said, found that losing the forgivable portion puts the future of up to 200,000 small businesses in jeopardy. They found that only 1/3 of the businesses, they say, have the money to repay their loans for today's deadline. 1/3 say they don't have the money and they plan to borrow, which is extremely costly to them. They say 1/3 they don't have the money and can't secure a loan. Extending the deadline will give these businesses one more year to keep reducing their principal without being burdened by ever-increasing interest. Maybe you could put yourself on mute so I can finish. I'm sorry. If the Liberals keep refusing to extend the deadline with the forgivable portion intact, these businesses will have to find even more money to spend on interest. And that will force them to make hard choices that could put their workers' jobs at risk. Well, the Liberals have been outright refusing this extension. The Conservatives have been absolutely silent. And it seems like they both don't want to admit the truth out loud, that they don't want to support small businesses right now, but have no problem helping rich corporations get off the hook. Instead, the deadline needs to be extended to allow them to spend the money they need on scaling up, keeping their workers employed, and making investments that benefit their local economies. We can't fully calculate the economic and social benefits of these businesses remaining open and putting that money into their businesses and communities instead of interest payments. But we know it's huge. So I'm asking the committee to support this motion in support of small business people in their riding and doing the right thing. If they go to any restaurant in their riding, they're going to find they're having challenges recovering from COVID-19, that many businesses in the hospitality industry have not even made a dent in making a payment in repayment of their loans. And they're just finding their feet now. So I'm urging the committee to support this motion.
Thanks, Mr. Johns. The motion has been distributed in both languages. So I assume everyone has it. Mr. Sousa, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the NDP putting forward a motion that reaffirms and describes the SIBA program and the importance by which this was brought forth to help hundreds of thousands of businesses keep afloat during a tremendous time of uncertainty during the pandemic. And I have a few amendments that I've already discussed with Mr. Johns, and I'd like to submit them to the clerk, and I'll submit it both in English and in French. And I would prefer to move them in a block, but we're prepared to move them separately as well. But my first amendment is to note that businesses are still recovering from the aftermath of COVID, and note that the government has previously extended the SIBA deadline twice before. I would further add the following words: in Canada, risk closing, and then remove that, and then due to the economic aftershocks of the COVID pandemic. And I would add the words deadline and the words for a third time, and I can elaborate further when I read it in full. My second amendment would be to add the language of reaffirming the value of SIBA and calling for a government response to report to the House. And it would add at the end of the motion, in quotations, and reaffirms the value of these programs to small business owners and Canadians across the country, and that the committee call for a government response to its report. My third amendment acknowledges the actions of Conservatives over the course of the pandemic and the continued scapegoating of pandemic programs as drivers of inflation. And I would add the following words: for a third time, given the fact that we've extended it twice before, and given the Conservative leadership's description of pandemic supports like SIBA as they, quote, big fat government programs, end of quote, and numerous occasions on which the Conservative Party of Canada voted against pandemic support programs that supported Canadians and Canadian businesses. I'd be happy to move these amendments as a block for the sake of time, but I'm also prepared to move them separately, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Sousa. Mr. Generous.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to address a couple things that are happening. Yeah. So first of all, we have this this kind of manufactured disagreement between two coalition partners here. If these issues around small business are priorities for the NDP, they should have put these things forward as part of their coalition deal. And it would be a welcome change if this government started paying attention to the concerns of small businesses, because we know that small businesses have been treated absolutely brutally under this government. The disdain this government has shown, going back to calling small businesses tax cheats, the Prime Minister's own words, in fact, suggesting that many small businesses are simply his words, of course. He claimed that they are in many cases wealthy Canadians trying to avoid taxes. He knows a thing or two about wealthy Canadians trying to avoid taxes normally, but in this case, he's of course dead wrong. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy, and small businesses, taxpayers, Canadians of all backgrounds have experienced the pain associated with the radical economic agenda of the NDP liberal government. I of course have a great deal to say on that subject, but I would also add that the proposal from Mr. Sousa to require a government response to this report is not about actually getting a government response. It's about inserting a 120-day delay before this issue can be considered by the House in a concurrence motion, which Mr. Sousa or whoever made this recommendation to him, of course, knows. So the idea that there's some urgency, that we have to pass this today, well, this committee voting on this motion today is not going to impact the timeline because look, if the government was going to extend it, the government would need to extend it. The government has, by all indication, chosen not to do it. This is not a government that listens to small business. The best we could hope for through this process would be that this would be reported to the House. The subsequent effect of it being reported to the House it wouldn't be reported to the House until substantially after the deadline, and then certainly if Mr. Sousa is successful with his amendment, the earliest time the House could pronounce itself on this matter would be months and months from now. And this is being done at a time that has limited, unfortunately, our ability to ask critical questions to very senior public servants who are, needless to say, under a cloud of significant suspicion. I'm happy to debate this government's economic agenda and how poorly they've treated small businesses, but we have an urgent matter related to the Arrive scam situation. An urgent matter that follows not only $54 million spent on an app and RCMP investigating some of the related contractors, middlemen receiving large amounts of money for no work, but senior public servants accusing each other of lying and of and apparent retaliation for testimony given at parliamentary committees. In that vein, Chair, I did want to just identify the fact that I think it is time, as part of these hearings, that we hear from ministers. I know I can't move a motion, and I don't think you need a motion for that, but I think significant questions have been raised in this discussion among public servants that need to be answered by ministers. So I hope you would choose at some point soon to invite the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Treasury Board, and the Minister for Procurement to appear before the committee and help us unravel some of the contradictions we've heard among senior public servants, and also find out to what extent they have been privy to the conversations around Arrivecan, but also some of the retaliatory actions taken against public servants. I also hope at some point we could also hear from the minister at the time, Mr. Mendicino. Chair, and I also I've been reflecting on this over the course of this hearing, and I'd also related to the issues around retaliation against public servants. I would like to raise a question of privilege, and this question of privilege. So you can advise me on the appropriate procedure around this, Chair. But my view is that it is a critical privilege of committees and of parliamentarians to be able to call witnesses, hear from witnesses, and for those witnesses to be able to present their information without being subject to retaliation and intimidation. When witnesses are subject to retaliation and intimidation, it limits the rights and privileges of committees because it constrains our ability to actually hear and receive accurate and truthful testimony. And it's clear to me from the series of events we have seen that if not direct intentional retaliation, there certainly is a strong appearance of retaliation, which will cast a chill on the ability of this committee to hear from public servants. We want to be able to have public servants come before the committee and simply tell us what they're hearing. And I think now that is going to be constrained as a result of the fact that senior public servants have retaliated against those that have given direct and frank testimony. So I think this is a matter that does touch on privilege of members of Parliament. So I wanted to put that on the record as well.
Thank you, Mr. Generous. Mr. Johns, really quick, please.
I think if Mr. Jenius is fine, I'm fine.
Thanks. Mr. Generous has raised a question of privilege. Privilege issues have to take precedence, and unfortunately it does adjourn the debate. We will take up this motion. Let me finish. We will take up this motion on the amendment by Mr. Sousa at our next meeting, but privilege issues have to take precedence.
Sure, just point of order. I mean, if the matter of privilege is dealt with, then we
can get back.
Then we go back to it. Yeah. That's,
We will resume.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we'll resume it after on Mr. Sousa's amendment after we've dealt with the issue of privilege, which has to take precedence. Let me just finish, Mr. Johns, and I will go to you. But Mr. Genovese has raised the question of privilege. House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition. Page 1060 prescribes my role as chair of the committee in entertaining question of privilege. I'm going to quote right from the book. Chair of a committee does not have the power to rule on questions of privilege. Only the speaker has that power. If a member wishes to raise a question of privilege during a committee meeting or an incident arises in connection with the committee's proceedings that may constitute a breach of privilege, the committee chair allows the member to explain the situation, which I will do in a moment. The chair then determines whether the question raised, in fact, relates to parliamentary privilege. If the chair determines that the question does not relate to parliamentary privilege, the committee may then consider presenting a report on the question to the House. Mr. Genovese has referred to allegations of a campaign of retaliation and intimidation against the two individuals who have appeared as witnesses at our committee, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, in connection with the evidence they've given to committee. Boston Gagnon, page 115, explain that, and I'm quoting from them, just says prima facie cases of privilege have been found for the intimidation of members and their staff. The intimidation of a committee witness has also been found to be a prima facie breach of privilege. And to quote, I'm satisfied that Mr. Genovese has raised a matter which relates to parliamentary privilege, and accordingly I invite him to move the motion and speak on it. But before I do, I will suggest that we dismiss our witnesses, Mr. Gorman and Mr. Ososki, so that we can attend to this privilege issue. Witnesses, thank you for joining us again. Mr. Johns, I'll get you I will allow Mr. Genovese to address this, and then I will get to your point of order.
Thank you, Chair. And just out of respect for the discussion that was going on previously, I hope we can deal with this issue quickly, but it is a very serious one. So I hope we can get some consensus. I would simply propose that we ask the chair to prepare a report which lays out the simple facts of the case and report it to the House.
Thanks. I'll take a speaking list. I have Mr. Sousa, but we'll get to Mr. Johns. Your point of order first.
Well, my point of order, Mr. Chair, is that the SIBA loan extension deadline ends today. The member talked about urgency, but he's not talking about small businesses and the urgency they have. They're sweating it out. I had a constituent of mine call me crying yesterday about the deadline and the impact it's having on his mental, financial, physical, relationships, health. It's a matter of urgency. And I know the Conservatives do not support small business.
Right,
and
Mr. Johns, Mr. Johns, I'm going to interrupt you. I understand what you're saying. We will hopefully get back to the motion immediately if we can dispose of the point of privilege, but unfortunately for this case, under our rules, the point of privilege and the issue around the intimidation of the witness has to take precedence. But the rules do state as soon as we can deal with this, and it's a very simple motion from Mr. Generous, we will return immediately, hopefully today, because we do have resource continue for a bit longer on Mr. Sousa's amendment to your very important motion. And I do take note of the date of January 18th. Mr. Sousa, on the privilege motion.
So we had Ms. O'Gorman come forward requesting an in-camera opportunity to discuss these matters a bit more open. And now we have a situation where we've just sent her away. And it's interesting that we want privilege when, in fact, it was broken when she was prepared to appear to discuss this matter. I'm a bit concerned now that we are, in fact, manipulating and prejudicing the integrity of the investigation. And I think it's unfortunate that these procedures are taking place. We have motions before the House. The fact that something is taking precedent over the others is a bit confusing, I think, for all that are watching and trying to understand, because some of the urgencies that's being brought forward. I need clarity as to what is taking place here, why we let go of someone who is appearing before us at the request of the committee, and we didn't finish off that discussion, why we're now putting forward something that may provide that may very well hurt the integrity of the investigation and jeopardizes the procedure, and why we're not giving Mr. Johns the respect he's requesting in respect to his amendment that he put forward prior to Mr. Generous, and the amendments that I put forward as well, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Johns. Go ahead, then Mr. Generous.
Well, I would say this, that we just spent an hour and 57 minutes asking questions of witnesses here today at this committee at an emergency meeting on a constituency week, okay? It's not like we're not giving this issue a priority. We are giving it a priority. We met yesterday, another day where meetings weren't scheduled on a constituency week. I have 31 communities in my riding. I'm missing events all over my riding because this issue is an emergency. When I bring forward another emergency with the deadline of today that impacts 200,000 businesses across this country, and the Conservatives want to play games, like that's exactly what's going on here. So I would move that we call a vote on the motion of privilege.
We can get to that after we finish our speaking list. Mr. Generous.
Just very briefly, Mr. Johns, I agree with part of what you said. Let's proceed to complete this matter, and then we'll immediately return to your issue. I am required procedurally, if I believe there's a breach of privilege, to bring it forward immediately. I didn't make the rule that it takes precedent, but we will, we'll complete this, then we'll go to the next. So it's an important issue. I'm done. Let's proceed to a vote if necessary, or simply adopt it and move on.
Back to you, Mr. Johns, or is your hand still up from before?
No, I absolutely want to come back to this because, Mr. Speaker, if he felt his privilege was being breached, why didn't he bring it up before? Why did he have to wait till there was going to be a discussion and a vote on extending the SIBA loan and a call from this committee on the government to do such a thing with a deadline? Why did he have to wait until this motion was brought forward?
Okay. Since we do not have any more on the speakers list, we will go to vote. But before we do so, can I get you, Mr. Genuis, just to reiterate the motion?
Yes, I will, Chair. I just out of respect for one colleague has stepped out of the room maybe for brief. I'm not, anyways, I think. Okay, not one of ours, but anyways, okay. So the motion I have is I move that we ask the chair to prepare a report which lays out the simple facts of the case and report it to the House.
Okay. We'll proceed to the vote. Go to Mr. Clerk. Yeah. Colleagues, do we need a recorded vote, or are we fine just to agree and move on?
Recorded vote, please.
There we go.
Ms. Atwin.
No.
Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Jahari.
Oppose.
Mr. El Khoury.
Contre.
Mr. Sousa.
No.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Genuis.
Yes.
Ms. Kusie.
In favor.
Madame Vignola. Mr. Johns.
No.
It's 4 yeas, 6 nays. Defeated.
Okay, that is defeated. We are returning to Mr. Johns' motion with Mr. Sousa's amendments. I think Mr. Johns, I see your hand. Let's start a speaking list. We have resources probably for about another 15 minutes.
Chair, just a point of order. Can you help advise me on the procedural aspect of this? So we've raised an issue of privilege. The committee has defeated a privilege motion. Does that effectively kill consideration of the privilege issue, or does that open the door for an alternate privilege motion to be raised? I'm a bit perplexed by this in that we do have an issue clearly where the privileges of members are under threat, and we would have easily moved on to the other item if we had been able to adopt a privilege motion of some sort. But the defeat of it leaves me wondering if we have any alternative remedy available to us, or if that's simply inferred to be the will of the committee to, the will of the two parties who voted against it to essentially shut down this issue.
Let's suspend for a few seconds. I will confer with our clerk, and I will advise.
Starting to get a little spicy in there. You know, they wouldn't have to put forward that motion if the government did what he was supposed to do and helped these people with their SIBA anyway. They could have extended it all on their own, but now they're trying to push it on to, like, the conservatives are the ones that are stopping it. But it's not the conservatives' job to deal with that.
Advice I am given, it's treated like a regular motion, that another question of privilege can be brought back, but it would have to be substantively different from the first one. So treated.
Point of order, to clarify on that, the motion would have to be substantively different, or the question of privilege would have to be?
Treated similar to a motion. It would
Okay,
have to
so
be
we have
substantively
the NDP Liberal
different.
Coalition killing the privilege issue for the time being.
Yes, that would be correct. Do you have a point of order, Ms. Vignola, or on add to the speaking list for the debate on
Okay, I have
Mr. Sousa's
sorry,
amendment?
another point of order, Chair.
On a point of order or addressing Mr. Sousa's?
It's just about having the amendment, just pour avoir.
It's just, I would just like to have a written copy of the amendment in French and in English so that I can read it, understand it, because I do better with reading. I'm a visual person.
Or on Mr. Sousa's amendments? Yeah. I have a point of order. Mr. Johns, is it a point of order or is it to continue the debate on Mr. Sousa's amendment?
I would like to.
Can you just let me know so I can
speak? Yes, I would like to speak to that, but I think we should suspend while Ms. Vignola gets a chance to look at the motion.
Okay, so it's not a point of order. Mr. Sousa, do you have it in writing for both official languages you can forward to the clerk?
I do, and we'll forward to you now.
Oh, it's just coming out now, so why don't we move on to Mr. Genuis's, you had a point of order, Mr. Genuis?
It's okay. I'll add me to the speaking list, please. But I had wanted to see the amendment in writing, but I understand that's going to happen.
We'll suspend for a couple seconds to get the amendment out in writing to everyone. And then we have Mr. Johns speaking on the amendment, then Mr. Genuis, and then perhaps Mrs. Vignola.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're trying to do. So this is supposed to be a thing about the Arrivecan. That's why this meeting is here. But the other guys are trying to bring up this SIBA loan thing. But what they're trying to do is pin it on the Conservatives so they can go out and say, well, we might have got this issue dealt with, except that the Conservatives stopped it in committee. Meanwhile, this committee, they're like right now, this meeting is not supposed to be about that. They just want business owners to be like, oh my God, the Conservatives are really against us. Yeah, it's all a runaround. These guys think people are stupid, like they can't catch on to the fact that that's what they're trying to do. It's just pull the wool over your eyes. But that's exactly it. So people are going to watch glimpses of this, and then they're going to be appalled by the fact that the Conservatives aren't jumping to the SIBA loan thing and dealing with that because it's such a massive crisis in this country. Well, you know what? The government could have dealt with it if they wanted to, but they chose not to. That's on the Liberal government. The NDP is just as much to blame because they're propping up the Liberal government, but yet they manufacture this disagreement in order to stage it to look like the Conservatives are the ones that are stopping the any extension for these small businesses. Now, I would not be surprised in a day or so that you see some headline or something somewhere that says the Conservatives are the reason why nobody got extensions for their small business loans. I won't be surprised. Like, they'll try to completely do a smear job and take the heat off the NDP and the Liberals and throw it all on the Conservatives. And you know what? The left will run with it. That's what you'll see in most of the memes tomorrow and the next day, because the left will just go crazy about it. And then they'll be on like every forum being like, Conservatives did this. they're the reasons why all these stores are closing, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, has nothing to do with them, and this meeting has nothing to do with it.
Circulated. I've got a speaking list. I have Mr. Johns, then Mr. Genuis. Go ahead, Mr. Johns.
Well, first, I do want the opportunity to respond to Mr. Genuis about the fact that today at OGGO, we're having an emergency meeting, studying an urgent matter. Like I said, we spent an hour and 57 minutes discussing this matter. We met specifically because it's so urgent today and yesterday on constituency riding weeks. But this is an urgent matter for those 200,000 businesses that are facing this deadline today. This could cost, hundreds of thousands of jobs. I know the Conservatives don't support SIBA. They should just come out and say it. Merchant fees, they fought hard. They did not stand up against lowering merchant fees and for lowering merchant fees for small business. They sat idle on that.
It's just a smear job. That's all this is a smear job.
Taxes when they were under their watch from 5%, but 5% for large corporations, but only 1% for small business. And I know this. I was a small business owner and I ran a chamber of commerce. But they should come clean on this. And I hope that they will support this amendment and this motion, and we can support small business. So I'd like to move to call the vote on the amendment right now.
Thanks. We cannot go to a vote while we still have a speakers list. So we go to Mr. Genuis, then Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you, Chair. This has been really disappointing, I have to say. I was very clear, I think, that I'll stand back here. It's been away for 4 weeks, and I've missed committee so much, and now I'm excited. But, Chair, we had an opportunity today to do two things at once: to recognize the important issues raised by my privilege motion, and also to deal with Mr. John's motion. And I put forward a privilege motion because I believe that the privileges of members of Parliament are now under threat. They are under threat because we have a situation in which people came before our committee. They provided frank and candid testimony in which they were critical of other public servants and indirectly of a minister. They did so in response to questions that were asked. They weren't particularly critical in their opening statements, as I recall, but they gave frank answers in response to frank questions. Immediately after that, those individuals were subject to severe retaliation, the extremely rare situation of public servants suspended without pay. This is what happened to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano. We're concerned about what this does for them, but in particular, this raises significant questions about the integrity of our democratic processes. We have been trying to get to the bottom of what happened in the Arrivecan scandal. We have had people, public servants, and consultants repeatedly lying and accusing each other of lying before this committee. So creating an environment in which witnesses can appear and can speak the truth and be protected while they speak the truth is going to be our only way of getting to the bottom of what happened. And as such, I raised a privilege question, which, according to the rules, which I did not make up, takes precedent over the motion that was on the floor. I intended to do that in my final round of questions, but Mr. Johns moved a motion beforehand. To Mr. John's point, he says that he wanted his motion on SIBA dealt with. Well, if we had gone to the vote and we had passed the motion relating to recognizing the abuse of privilege that took place, then we would have immediately returned to Mr. John's motion. And I would have been, certainly favorably disposed to wanting to work collaboratively on that. Mr. Johns chose to throw in his lot with the increasingly evidently corrupt Liberal government in choosing to bury that question of privilege. And Liberals and New Democrats voted together to kill that question of privilege, which means we will not be able to proceed, at least on that particular question of privilege, and address this issue moving forward. Now, that's gravely concerning to me, that we have Liberals and New Democrats trying to bury this issue of retaliation against public servants who speak out. And it suggests to me that Liberals and New Democrats don't want to get to the bottom of what happened with Arrivecan. They don't want public servants to feel comfortable telling the truth. They instead want public servants to feel intimidated, to worry for their jobs, and therefore to come here and toe the party line. That's not what I want. What I want is public servants feeling that they can be frank and honest, and when they're frank and honest before a committee, they will be protected. And it was clear to me today from the testimony we received, from the witnesses that were before us, they could provide no explanation for why immediately after witnesses appeared before this committee, they received letters telling them that they were under a cloud of investigation. Subsequently, they had support for their legal fees pulled, and then and now they're on leave without pay. We have retaliation against public servants who come before committee and try to provide frank answers to clear questions.
Point of order.
What is the government trying to hide and bury on this?
Sorry, let me interrupt. Sorry, Mr. Johns, go ahead.
It's taking relevance here in terms of the SIBA loan deadline today that is running out for 200,000 small businesses.
I have the floor, Mr. Chair. I have the floor.
Point of order.
It's not a point of order.
So finish up, Mr. Johns.
It's not a point of order.
Unless to Mr. Johns, go ahead.
We could have done both.
Okay.
Is it my turn to speak, or are we?
Well, no.
We could have done both.
Are you
It's
finished
not your
with-
turn to
sorry,
speak. It's a
Mr.
point of
Genuis,
order, which is a
please.
matter dealing with
Mr.
order.
Genuis, please. Are you finished with the point of order, Mr. Johns? Sorry, there's a bit of conflicting. Thanks.
I think you got.
I appreciate. Yeah, I appreciate your point of order. We always allow wide latitude for relevance. Mr. Genuis, continue.
Well, thank you, Chair. Now, if this was about a sincere attempt to address both issues, we could have addressed both issues, right? I would have been happy to work with Mr. Johns to adopt an agreeable privilege motion, and then to work on a motion that addresses the very serious issues that he's raised with respect to SIBA. Now, instead, we have before us this nonsense Liberal amendment that is designed at inserting explicit political attacks into the text of a committee motion. Now, this is obviously ridiculous. Liberals would no doubt much rather be throwing nonsense attacks at the Conservative leader than doing the hard work of governing the country, or than helping us get to the bottom of what happened in Arrivecan. And unfortunately, Mr. Johns is playing into their hands here. I would prefer if we adopt the privilege motion and killed these silly amendments from Mr. Sousa.
Let me interrupt.
And then we can.
Let me interrupt, Mr. Genuis. Point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Johns.
Mr. Chair, the Conservatives went for the throat with Mr. Utano and Mr. McDonald, and today they're saying they're here to protect Mr. Utano.
This is debate.
What's your point of order, Mr. Johns?
Debate.
Well, I mean, he's talking about point of privilege, but like seriously, you can't make this stuff up. Anyways, that's my point of.
Yeah, that's not a point of order, but I appreciate your comments. Continue, Mr. Genuis.
Chair, I will, although it wasn't a point of order, I will respond to the implication of what Mr. John said. Conservatives on this committee are committed to getting to the truth and to establishing the conditions in which witnesses can come and deliver frank testimony, in which hopefully they deliver honest testimony, in which they can be asked, yes, hard and tough questions. And I think Conservatives have asked tough questions of every witness that's appeared before this committee. We've pressed Mr. McDonald on his claims. We pressed Mr. Doan on his claims. We pressed Mr. Firth, and so on and so forth. So it's not about being for or against one witness or another witness. We believe, though, that every witness should be protected in their ability to come before this committee, receive appropriate support in the process, and not be subject to retaliation after that. If a witness comes here under conditions where they worry about employment consequences for telling the truth, then we have a grave problem for the health of our democracy. And I think what Arrivecan reveals is that we do have a grave problem for the health of our democracy. We have Liberals and New Democrats working together, prepared to prevent questions of privilege of parliamentarians from being considered and going forward. And the idea that this was about getting to SIBA, look, by the time we were on the vote, we were already on the vote. So whatever happened at the vote, it was going to be done after that anyways. And Mr. Johns still chose to vote against the privilege motion. So he has to be held accountable for being part of this cover-up, part of failing to support our motion to actually allow this issue to be properly considered. And further to that, we have these amendments. Mr. Sousa was a finance minister in Ontario at one time, and I would certainly be happy to discuss the record of the Wynne government when it came to negative impacts on small business. And I wonder if some of my Ontario colleagues will have things to add to that. But he has put in this motion. He has tried to make it partisan by adding just obvious nonsense political attack language. And it's clear that the Liberals would rather be purveying these kinds of attacks rather than allowing the committee to continue to do the important work it has been doing on Arrivecan, and rather than doing the necessary work towards the achievement of a consensus around this issue. And just to reiterate, in terms of the timelines on SIBA, so the extension of the SIBA loan deadline is a decision that would have to be taken by the Government of Canada. The executive would have to take that decision. There is nothing this committee could do or by doing would prevent from the government making that decision one way or the other. So small businesses who are concerned about any aspect of the agenda of this government, including regarding the SIBA extension, need to know that it is the Liberal government that is responsible for setting and maintaining this deadline. And it is a Liberal government supported through a coalition agreement with the NDP. So if Mr. Johns wants to be up on a high horse and saying we need things for small business, the Liberals are ignoring small business, well, he needs to go talk to his leader and his House leader, and he needs to ask them why they continue to give the Liberals a blank check, why the NDP are so terrified of facing voters that they will give Liberals a blank check. Because that's what this really comes down to. Mr. Johns can say all he wants about motions at committee, but it is a decision of the executive regarding granting the extension, and whether the executive will grant this extension or not depends only on the House insofar as the House decides whether or not it has confidence in the executive. Now, our position is clear as it relates to confidence. We do not have confidence in this government. We have voted non-confidence, I think more or less at every opportunity we've had. We did it hundreds of times in the fall. And our position is clear. We do not have confidence in this government. We think Canada needs a new government. The NDP have a different position. The NDP have confidence in the government, and they repeatedly vote confidence in the government, in spite of their crocodile tears over the impacts of this government's policies on small businesses. So I would challenge the NDP, if they are serious about wanting to do something for small business, then join us in expressing non-confidence in the worst government small businesses have ever had to deal with. Again, anybody that is concerned about the impact of this government's policies on small business should join us in voting non-confidence in a government that has been worse for small business than any government in Canadian history. The NDP will not do that. Instead, to try to cover for their
Mr. Generous, I'm going to
failures.
interrupt. Unfortunately, we are past our time and we are out of resources. I am adjourning.
No, Mr. Speaker, point of order.
they're shutting down that fast, but that's exactly what I was saying. That's all the Liberal and the NDP want, is because the Conservatives are high in the polls right now. They need something to get out into the public to make the Conservatives look bad. So they're boshing this meeting, meanwhile has nothing to do with them, to try to get some sort of crap on the Liberal Party. Or on the Conservative Party, sorry. It's a bunch of bull is all it is. It's just pure bull. Meanwhile, the Conservatives and that committee can't do anything. There's nothing they can do. That problem is Justin Trudeau's, and it has been from the beginning. Only they can make that decision. It's unreal how they try to do that. So you're going to see leftists, like some left-wingers, making memes and posts and all that, saying that the Conservatives are the ones that stopped help for small businesses. But you've seen it here. It's a bunch of bull. That's not how it went down. It's these guys are just trying to stonewall the committee. Like, the Liberals put in amendments knowing that that's going to stop the committee from being able to go further in what they're doing. So now they're going to have to deal with the amendments, which can take months. And then the NDP trying to throw something in that had nothing to do with that committee. So it's crazy. But anyway, guys, have a good one. That's it for today. And I do have one committee tomorrow. It's on health. I've never seen this committee, so it might be good. It might not. But it is a point of order, a standing order. So that means it's urgent. So I'm assuming it has something to do with our healthcare. All right. Until then, we'll see you tomorrow. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. And don't forget to share. Try to get that algorithm going so that we get more views.